Hello everyone, and welcome to Baldur's Gate 3 Overexplained. Previously, I've done lots of runs where I've taken the tabletop 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set and kind of crammed in extra limitations on myself. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to be using what is mechanically available in Baldur's Gate 3 and talking you through all of what is available, the decisions, how they're made, what's going to be good, what's going to be less good, and try and give you guys an understanding of what's going on in the mechanics in case you guys are struggling, not knowing how tabletop Dungeons & Dragons has been translated into a video game. So the very first thing we're going to do is crack onto a new game. There will be the opening cinematics. I will let them play, but I will put timestamps down in the description. So that sets up the basic premise of the plot. We have been abducted by these alien-looking creatures called Mind Flayers or Illithids, and they have put a tadpole into our brain, and it is understood that over time that tadpole will turn us into one of them, and we would like very much for that to not happen. So this is our character creation screen. You'll kind of recognize elements of this from various parts of other role-playing games. But for now, we'll start on the left here and work our way across to the right. At this time, we are able to make a custom character, but when the full game comes out, you'll be able to select some of the other some of the other companion characters and play them in full. But they're not available yet, but I will tell you about them because that's going to inform the party that we build later. Because at any time whilst exploring, you can have a party of up to 4 members, sometimes 5 or 6 because there's NPCs that can kind of get absorbed into the party temporarily, but there's a core party of 4 people. Astarion is a half-elf rogue, or an elf, might be an elf rogue. Lae'zel is a Githyanki fighter. Gale is a human wizard. Shadowheart is a half-elf cleric, and Will is a human warlock. The first choice you can make is whether you want to present as female or male. I don't think there's any mechanical changes to selecting one over the other, so I'm going to pick presenting male today. And you can change your character's name, so just because we can, it's going to be Gothic Lord UK today. And then the first thing that we have to think about is a background. So the background is kind of like, what were you doing in your life as your career before you became an adventurer thrust into this life of danger? And so you get some background blurb about who you were and what you did, but this is going to inform 2 particular things. First of all, you get some background features. So this person as an acolyte, You have spent your life serving in a temple, learning sacred rites and providing sacrifices to gods or gods you worship. Serving the gods and discovering their sacred works will guide you into greatness. So this means you get insight into proficiency, or insight into, and insight into religion. We'll talk about proficiency in a moment, but as you select through the backgrounds, you see that those things change. So if you're a charlatan, you get deception proficiency and sleight of hand proficiency. If you select criminal, you get deception and stealth, acrobatics performance if you're an entertainer, and so on. And so for this, I think we want charisma proficiencies. So we can get deception, insight, persuasion, history, persuasion, athletics. Alright, we're going to take the charlatan. Will have deception proficiency and sleight of hand proficiency. I'll explain those a bit further in a moment. Over here on the left, you can see what your kind of final character looks like, but this is going to change dramatically as we select the other things we can change through the course of this selection screen. So now we select our race. This is our biological makeup, what makes us who we are as a creature before we get to pick a specialization as somebody who has skills and talents. Elves. So you have 8 different select races at the moment. You have elves, tieflings, drow, human, githyanki, dwarf, half-elf, and halfling. And each of those will then have a sub-race which will let you make another smaller change to the bonuses that you get. So, for example, an elf gets keen senses, that's proficiency in perception. Fey ancestry. The Feywild casts a veil over your mind. You have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and you can't be put magically to sleep. It increases your dexterity stat by 2. You get some proficiency with some weapons, and you get dark vision. And then as a high elf, you have a base racial speed of 30 feet. That's how far you can move in one turn. And your intelligence stat increases by 1, as well as getting to select a cantrip. Whereas if you are a wood elf, you get fleet of foot, so your movement speed is 35. You have Mask of the Wild. You are raised to blend in with your natural surroundings. You gain proficiency in stealth, and you get wisdom +1. So all these different skills and abilities are going to be different depending on which type of creature you play. And for this, I think I'm going to play a high half-elf. So this lets us select a cantrip, and then we can add +1 to 2 of our scores, and we get Fey ancestry, so we can't be put to sleep magically, and we have advantage against being charmed. Charisma +2, dark vision to see within the dark within 40 feet, and our base racial speed of 30 feet. So we'll change our stats in just a moment, but then you can go to your appearance. Your appearance doesn't impact anything mechanically in the game, so have fun with it. You can change to any and all of the skin colours rather than just the ones that you might expect for a particular race. You can do the same with eye colour, but we'll just leave our handsome lad as he is. Then we get to pick our class. The class is going to be the main fundamental thing that impacts how you change over the course of your campaign. So we have 8 current classes available. There's clerics, which take their powers from a god and often have healing spells or buffing spells. There are druids, which take their spells from nature. They can change themselves into other animals like bears and cats, which have strategic advantages on the battlefield. Fighters have a high armor class and are much harder to hit, and they are proficient with most types of weapons. Rangers are kind of between a fighter and a druid. They have a kinship with nature and the environment around them, and they can also sometimes get a beast or a companion to help them. And they're also usually typically good with some larger weapons and bows. Rogues are high stealth characters, and they get this action called sneak attack, which when they attack something when they're not being perceived or when they have advantage, they get to add more damage to their attack. Sorcerers are a spellcaster that use inherent magic within themselves to cast spells. Warlocks have made a pact with some kind of devil or demon that gives them the powers that they have. And wizards learn their magic through books and study in libraries, and that's how they come about their magical powers. Now, the other companions that you can play, as mentioned, are a cleric in Shadowheart, a warlock in Will, a wizard in Gale, a fighter in Lae'zel, and a rogue in Astarion. So we're going to avoid all of those classes because we will be able to play as those later on if we wish. And so for this, I'm going to play a sorcerer, and I'm going to play the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer. So, as I said, sorcerers get their powers innately from within, and as part of that we get to pick up to 4 cantrips. We already know the Mage Hand cantrip. We selected that from our race. And the reason I picked Mage Hand as opposed to another type of spell is if we come back to here, we'll see that we use our charisma. There we go, there's the star. We use our charisma as our main spellcasting stat. So the higher our charisma, the better our spell attacks are going to be, the harder it is going to be for foes to save against our magical effects. So over here, our high elf cantrip is defended against using intelligence, and our intelligence isn't going to be very good. So rather than taking a damage spell that is going to perform poorly by using our intelligence modifier that's going to be low, I selected Mage Hand as our chosen high elf cantrip because it doesn't have any impact whether we cast it with our intelligence stat or our charisma stat. It's going to work effectively the same in either case. So we take our high elf cantrip as Mage Hand because that uses intelligence, and intelligence is not very good. And we can then change our charisma score to be higher, which is going to impact our class skills. So we come here, we select 3 other cantrips. Now, a cantrip is kind of a small spell that you always have the ability to cast, whereas other spells are more powerful, but you have a limited pool of slots that you can expend to cast those spells. So we're going to want a cantrip that does damage. So Firebolt does 1d10 damage by doing an attack roll. So this is, you will roll a d20, you will add your proficiency and your charisma bonus, and if that number is higher than the enemy's armor class, you will hit them. So that's one of basically 2 ways to do damage with a spell. The other is to force the enemy to make a save. So if we look at something like Poison Spray, rather than being an attack roll with a ranged attack as it says there on Firebolt, this is a saving throw against Constitution. So rather than us rolling a d20 and adding our stats to see if we hit them, with Poison Spray, they have to make a save. So they'll roll a d20 and add their saving throw on Constitution to see if they can buff themselves through that attack and whether they take damage or not. So sometimes, say you were fighting a stone golem that had an armor class of 25. That's going to be incredibly hard to hit when we're only rolling a d20 and adding a few points to that. But if it doesn't have very high constitution, you can go make a save, and if it only has +1 to its constitution, it's going to be much harder for it to not take damage against a saving throw. So we'll take Poison Spray as well, and then we have room for 1 more. We already have Mage Hand, so we don't need to take that twice. We'll take Chill Touch. This is another distance damaging cantrip, but undead creatures get disadvantage on attack rolls if they're hit with it. And let's take the Light cantrip. We can use that hopefully to buff some of our friends in the darkness later. Then we get to pick some spells. So these are first level spells. They will need to expend a first level spell slot in order to cast them. And so for this, I'm going to take Chromatic Orb. This is a high damage attack roll of a certain element. And I'm going to take Thunder Wave. Release a wave of thunderous force. It deals 2d8 thunder damage and pushes away creatures and objects. Then we get to pick our Dragon Ancestor. So this is part of our Draconic Ancestry because we are a Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer. So our magic comes from some ancient relationship or ancient ancestries to a draconic force. So whichever you pick is going to impact how your relationship with damage on certain elements are changed. So Draconic Ancestry Red, fire is your damage type associated with your dragon ancestor. At 6th level, spells that deal fire damage are more powerful and you become resistant to fire damage. Now in early access currently, we only get up to level 4, so we won't be able to get any higher than that, so just keep that in mind. Then we have acid, lightning, cold, poison, fire again, cold, lightning, acid and fire. Why do we know Tash's hideous laughter? That's a great question. Well, we can change how our scales look, because we are draconic, and we can see them in all of the colours, even if we don't want to fit the particular palette that we have been given. Maybe we know that because of our bloodline? Yes, it seems we get the extra spell because we are draconic. So those are all the same. Those are the same. So we get the Tasha's Hideous Laughter spell, another 1st level spell. And then we have a number of hit points. That's how much energy in our reserves we have before we're knocked unconscious. We have proficiency in Constitution saving throws and Charisma saving throws. Proficiency with daggers, quarterstaffs and light crossbows. And we have our hit points and our armor class from Draconic Ancestry. So we get 1 extra HP per sorcerer level. And while we have dragon-like scales covering parts of our skin, when we aren't wearing armor, our base armor class increases by 3. So that's all the decisions that are made there to be made. Now we have skills. So this is where we talk about, I've been saying many things have proficiency. What does that mean? Well, at any time we might have to make some kind of an attack or a check. When we do that, we will typically roll a d20 to see if we pass the difficulty class of that check. So say I was trying to convince a landlord at a pub to give me a free bedroom for the night because I'm a hero of the realm. You might roll persuasion. So you make a persuasion check, you roll a d20, and then you get to add some extra modifiers to that if you are good at persuading people. And the 2 ways to be good at persuading somebody is to be proficient in that skill. So you've done it a lot, you are very good at this skill, you are proficient with it. That means you would add 2 to your attack roll or your ability check when you have proficiency. Now the proficiency bonus will increase to +3 and +4 as you go through the levels, but it means that you are a little bit better at doing that particular skill. We also can see that with our ability points, if we have a good charisma score, that's going to offer us a +3 on our charisma skills. So persuasion, intimidation, deception, and performance, I believe. So by being proficient in something, you get to be a little bit better at it. So we are already proficient in deception because we inherited that from our background in our origin. You remember we were a charlatan. We have proficiency in deception and sleight of hand. And then we get to pick 2 other proficiencies that we get because we are a sorcerer. Different classes get a different pool of proficiencies to select from. So because we're going to have high charisma, we want to select charisma skills. So we'll take intimidation and persuasion so that in a conversation, we can always kind of turn the tide of the conversation to how we want it to be. Then lastly, we have our ability points. So I'm going to set all these to 0 for now, or the lowest they will be. And then we'll talk about how scores impact the things that change. So currently, everything is 8 apart from charisma that is 10. So in this point buy system, we have a pool of 27 points to buy stats with. But as you increase your stats, the cost of each individual point gets more expensive. So if you look at our strength is currently 8, 27 goes to 26, this goes to 9, 26 goes to 25, this goes to 10, 24 to 11, 23 to 12, but then 22 to 13, 20 to 14. So that got more expensive. That cost 2 points to go from 13 to 14. Then from 14 to 15 is 2 points again. And that's as high as we can buy with our points. So we can't just set everything up to be really high because we won't have enough points to spend in our pool. So we have to think about how we're going to distribute our points accordingly. Now, as I've said before, we are a charisma caster, so we use our charisma modifier to cast our spells and abilities, and we use charisma for our social checks that we've taken proficiency in. So if we want to be very good at those, we need to increase our charisma. Now, something that you might be noticing is that the numbers on the right are the actual score, and then the numbers on the left in yellow are the modifier. So when you make a check, you will always be using the modifier to see how it influences your check. So if I need to solve a handcrafted puzzle to impress a merchant, I might use my dexterity to do that. But currently I have -1 because my score is only 8. Now everything starts at a base of 10. That's the average for a commoner. But as you go up in numbers, you get a +1 every time you pass an even interval. So nothing changes on 11. On 12 you go to +1. Nothing happens on 13. On 14 you go to +2. However, when you're going down into the negative numbers, you always go down on the odds. So on 9 you go to -1, and if I could show you, on 7 we would go to -2. So that's the difference between your ability score and your ability modifier. So with all that in mind, it's time to decide what kind of stats we want for our hero here. And there's lots of different abilities that we can see by expanding these windows. So strength directly impacts how good your athletics is. Dexterity directly impacts your acrobatics, sleight of hand, and stealth. Constitution doesn't impact any individual skill, but it does impact how much health you have. Intelligence affects arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion. Wisdom affects animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival. Charisma influences deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. So throughout the game you might be asked to make any of those types of checks, and you'll be better at some than others depending on how good your modifier is. Now for a half-elf sorcerer, yes, we want to have a high charisma score, so we can set that to 16. The reason we can go up to 17 here is because we get a +2 from our ancestry. So we can set that to be a higher number than the others, but we're going to set that to 16 because the mechanical changes between 16 and 17 are the same. So we're going to save that point that would otherwise put us to 17, stay on 16, and then we can spend that point somewhere else. We are also going to want high dexterity. The other thing that dexterity impacts is how high your armor class is when you're not wearing any armor, or when you're wearing light or medium armor. Your dexterity modifier gets added onto your armor class, because armor class isn't just about how good and bulky your mechanical armor is, like chest plates and chainmail, but it also means how hard you are to hit because you're very good at evading or moving out of the way because you have a high dexterity stat. So having a high dexterity means that it's going to be harder for your opponent to hit you, so you have a higher armor class. It's not just about getting hit, it's about how easily you can evade being hit too. So we're going to want a high dexterity because we don't want to be hit particularly very much. And we also would like a good constitution score, because a good constitution score means we're going to have more health to work with. Now, in just focusing on our charisma, constitution, and dexterity, we're down to 4 points already, which is not very much. So we're going to dump strength. We're just going to leave that at a -1. I'm going to increase wisdom up to 10, and in fact, I'll increase wisdom up to 12. And what we do still have, though, is we have these selection pair of +1s here in our racial features. So we'll put 1 into dexterity. That will take the 15 that we put into dexterity into a 16. and then we have 1 + 1 remaining, and wherever we put that, it's not going to have any great impact on anything. So why don't we simply put it into intelligence? So that's all of our stats, our skills, our selection of class, our appearance, the race that we are, and the background that got us to being where we are now. So you can see on the left a kind of overview of everything that we have selected. Next time we will venture forth, see the opening cinematic for the game, and see how the decisions that we've made just now will impact the gameplay later on. If you have any questions about the entirety of this process, put them down below and I will endeavour to answer as many as I can. Or if you have any things that you would like explained to you throughout the course of the campaign, put them down there as well. Otherwise, thank you ever so much for watching. If you're enjoying this, please do hit that like button or subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.